Good afternoon. I am thrilled to be here with you today for the second in our three-part series on the artists that have produced beautiful pieces and will produce beautiful pieces for Temple Bethel. Today's session, the second of three that Susan Podolsky and I have prepared for you, is a delightful walk down the grand gallery of Temple Bethel of Boca Raton. Both pieces that are there now, and also in very much what we need at this time, a look towards the future. So we're going to start in our walk down the Grand Gallery by going to the Beck Chapel. So as we advance to the next slide, you will see the chapel from the exterior, and God willing, one day you will see it from the interior. As we advance to the next slide, I'm going to tell you the story of Richard Bluestein, who is an incredible architect, member of Temple Bethel, chair of this whole project that worked with our leadership and our lay people and our clergy to create this incredible chapel that is there. You are looking right now at the view from the outside and also with the doors wide open from afar. And we go into the next slide and go into that chapel, and you see also the well that's right outside that chapel. You will see this incredible, incredible vision of trees that adorn the wall. So the well that is outside that chapel leads us into this gorgeous chapel. Richard Bluestein, when he was in architecture school, had entered a contest to design a chapel in the woods. And what is incredible is that he won this contest as a student decades and decades ago. And he won this design that you see here on the wall. But when he got his award, one of his professors told him that it was kitsch. And it hurt. If you think about how someone says something to you in your youth, when you're idealistic and your whole future is in front of you, how it stays with you and you never forget it. Well, here, decades later, at the synagogue that he loved so much, Richard Bluestein got to put that award-winning design to life that he created as an architecture student in his youth, now in his full-fledged, fulfilled career and part of his own beloved synagogue, to create the Beck Chapel, which you see here. And now we're going to go into an incredible, incredible vision of what it was like to put that Beck Chapel and install this. And so we'll continue to Susan Podolsky and this amazing video that you'll see.
So much to my sadness, Barry and I were in Australia when the beautiful vision that Richie Bluestein had for our chapel arrived and was installed. So Richard asked AWI, the company that fabricated his design, to take a video, and I can't wait to share it with you.
That's an amazing video to see of the installation of the trees in the Beck Chapel that we are watching, correct? Is there anything you want to tell us about this installation?
So the installation took days. Everyone on staff and congregants who walked in through the doors could see this in process. And I think it's really interesting for all of us who have had the pleasure of praying in our new Beck family chapel that you know the backstory of how this all took place. But the backstory continues. Once the trees were installed, we needed to work on the ark and the bema. And if we could advance to the next slide, I would like to show you what the chapel looks like with its chairs, with the trees on both sides. And if we could advance to the next slide, we are now looking, and again, Richie's spectacular design of the ceiling. It was almost as if he was creating a Garden of Eden for our synagogue. What would we do with our ark? The entire members of the our task force decided we had to bring the sanctuary into the chapel. And so Richie contacted a glass etching company to etch the ark in the Beck family chapel to make it look like our ark in the Sinker sanctuary, because we are one. And then it was, what do we do about our eternal light? So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the artist that I came to know before I actually tell you about the eternal light. Next slide, please. Claude Riddell believes that his career as a practicing psychologist doesn't run counter to his artistic expression. In fact, during our first phone conversation, he shared that the disciplines actually coexist perfectly because both include a subtle listening skill and then acting on your intuitions. I knew immediately that Claude would be the perfect artist to design our new Ner Tamid. Claude believes that Ner Tamids radiate the stories of the people of a congregation, his own ancestors and himself, and you will hear Claude's story in a minute. His creative energy allows him to take bits and pieces of himself and masterfully make them into something more whole and spiritually holy. Working with glassblower Michael Boyd and sometimes incorporating stained glass, Riddell pours his emotion and his artistic energy into every piece he creates. Next slide. It is with great pleasure that we introduce Claude Riddell to you.
Claude, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And I want to ask you the question, how did your early life serve as inspiration for what you do?
Well, by the way, I wanted to say thank you I'm honored to be part of this, and thank you to the Beck family for supporting my work in this wonderful sanctuary. Just to back up, the other thought I had was I noticed in the trees that there were 7 trees of life. Trees, which again, is the symbol of the menorah, which it's what makes so much sense that the Ner Tamid would be a menorah in this form. In this case, it's so historically. I mean, my own family history, as I think has been mentioned, and perhaps it can be seen here in the writing, was to kind of that I grew up in a Holocaust immigrant family, where my parents ended up escaping Germany in 1938, immigrating to Ecuador for living there for 10 years, and then coming to the United States before I was born. And I grew up in that setting of that feeling, that the intensity of those emotions and that experience. And my grandfather was taken to Buchenwald on Kristallnacht. And when I was invited by my own synagogue, not even appreciating what was involved or what it meant to do this, to make the Ner Tamid in our first home, moving out of the Jewish Community Center, I was honored and thrilled. But afterwards, when I would sit with it and listen to people's responses, I discovered that this creation, what I had made went far beyond just a chandelier, but for me represented the whole of my life story, and the putting together of pieces, the shattered pieces of glass, from a Kristallnacht to the light and the nature that had been the source of my own sanctuary and recovery and journey in life. All the themes kind of came together in a personal way and in a very, Judaic way. So this has been a delightful journey, and for me, and everything I do feels like a blessing. And so thank you for having me and for this opportunity.
That's beautiful. We're going to move ahead to the next slide, and Susan's going to talk to us about a famous cultural moment that you had.
So as you continue to see other examples in the next slide of Claude's incredibly beautiful eternal lights, I'd like to share a story that Claude shared with me after he had already installed the eternal light at Bethel. Claude, you got a surprise call from the producers of a television show called Walking Dead. You shared with me you had never seen it. I had never seen it. Tell us about that phone call.
Well, that out of the blue, and actually only 3 days before I was about to leave on a dedication trip to another synagogue, I received a call from the producers of Fear the Walking Dead, the sequel to The Walking Dead, and they needed a Ner Tamid for their shoot, and didn't wanted to replace the one that was in the synagogue they were shooting. And I showed them some examples. They chose one of the more dramatic pieces I had available. Unfortunately, I had something available, and lo and behold, it ended up in an episode entitled Ner Tamid, the theme of which was from a Judaic vision in a kind of apocalyptic world. How the eternal light would help keep the effort that went into keeping it lit and keeping the faith by this rabbi. So I managed to pull that off very quickly and amazingly, and then almost a year later it was shown, and we had fun as a community watching the show, and everyone
Claude,
cheered when it came on the screen.
I'm sure.
Yes.
Claude, you actually shared with me that you were so proud that this episode, Ner Tamid, featured a Ner Tamid because it introduced a lot of the viewers to Judaism and actually the broader symbolism of what an eternal light is, and that it's, yes, an eternal flame, but it's also a flame of hope and goodness. Mm-hmm. I'd like to show the next slide and tell you all a little more about Claude. And then I know Jessica has a question about this particular Ner Tamid. When we chose Claude, we looked at 4 different artists, just so everyone knows. But in truth, it was an easy choice to choose Claude because each of his pieces are a one of a kind. So Jason, can I ask you to go back to the slide with the eternal light over the arc, please? So why a menorah? Thank you, Jason. So we're planning for the Beck Family Chapel. We have amazing donors, Susan and Bruce Muldo, who said they wanted to dedicate the new eternal light. What's it going to look like? And one day, Rabbi Dan called my house and he said, we got a problem. What is the problem, Dan? He said, we don't have a menorah for our chapel. I said, well, should we put a medallion on the new lectern? Should we have a freestanding menorah? And all of a sudden he went, I got an idea. I said, what is it? He said, let's make an eternal light that looks like a menorah. So A menorah, just to refresh everybody's memory, was lit by the high priests in the first and second temples. It's a symbol of the state of Israel and its mission to be a light amongst its nations. And the entire task force rallied around that idea. And there was no question that Claude was the artist to be able to do this. It's definitely a lot more modern than the styles that Claude usually works in, but he put such careful thought into the materials and the colors and even the lighting down through the day of installation. Now, Jason, could we go back? Because Jessica has a question about this slide.
Right, and Claude, it has to do, I'm not even sure if this is the right one or not, but if you can just quickly tell us the story of the Ner Tamid you created when someone handed you a piece of barbed wire that they had been handed from Treblinka, and tell the story of that before we move on.
Sure, that's not this piece, but after a presentation that I made to a Jewish arts community, one participants came up to me and said they had returned from a concentration labor camp where her father had been kept, and in the process of that tour, been given some barbed wire by the guide, and said they felt like I was the person that was meant to, to incorporate this into an eternal light. And they were inspired in that moment to do that. And we ended up, we did that, and eventually it ended up in a chain link part of the Ner Tamid, and it ended up in the Hebrew congregation, Bethel Hebrew congregation in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a very old synagogue made up of originally founded by Holocaust survivors. And in fact, given connecting the stories, the Fear of the Walking Dead story happened just 3 days before Yom HaShoah, where we did the dedication of the Holocaust Ner Tamid. So it was one of the very special kind of experience for me to be able to honor my family and honor the 6 million that we all live with, by being able to do that. So.
Claude, you've done it beautifully, and we can't thank you enough for being with us, for your work, being part of our synagogue, and we can't wait to be back in that chapel again and look at your Ner Tamid that fuses the Ner Tamid and the menorah together. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next slide and to a challenge that our synagogue had. We're going to move to slide 13. And the digital recognition board and this 21st century idea as a way to honor donors. We live in a time, and even more so under this time of pandemic, where things are visual. And so as we move ahead to the next slide, we're going to show this digital recognition wall. We're going to move again. There's our close-up gorgeous piece of Claude's. And then after that, you'll see screens that were mounted to the wall as a 21st century way to honor our donors, where there is a rolling ability to see donors, but not just that, to delve deep into the story of that donor, to have pictures of the donor's family and why they dedicated a specific piece. And it's a very 21st century way to honor those who Temple Bethel. And so we're going to move to the next slide and the challenge that an empty wall presented itself.
This empty wall. The art task force explored many ideas. Do we put in display cases? Do we put in art? Do we put in more storage? But we all felt that another piece of art was needed to connect us on our walk from the digital recognition wall to the sanctuary. And lo and behold, Leslie Weiselman went to a development conference, and she came back very excited because she saw an artist. She wasn't sure of his name. She showed me his art and she said, "You got to talk to this guy. Advance, please." So what attracted my interest to Zack Oxman so that I could present his work to the Art Task Force. And remember, the Art Task Force included Rabbi Jess, Rabbi Dan, many staff members, and many congregants. Zack Oxman's figurative sculpture has always invited the viewer to kind of linger and look. There's kind of an emotional resonance and such a strong sense of viewing that no one can help but be drawn into his works. Whether the scale, whatever the scale, the more we look, the more we see. There's almost a palette of life-affirming emotions, kind of a technical wizard, and we know that to be true, that allows earthbound images to just soar. The visceral challenges that Zack explores allows the earthbound visions to soar. And the result is rich and deep expression. Zack has been commissioned twice by the White House. He's been commissioned by cities, libraries, park districts, buildings, private collectors. Zack's pieces become monumental pieces of art that are unveiled layer by layer for the viewer. Whether he portrayed historical figures like Duke Ellington or Ray Bradbury, Zack's figures pay homage and show respect. Zack's 3D art forms become experiential because as one walks by and experiences it, it changes and it evolves. Zack is a third-generation Washingtonian, a graduate of Carnegie Mellon, with works exhibited in the National Museum of American Art, the White House, and more. Please meet Zack Oxman. Advance.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Give me the opportunity to meet you and share with you my work and this project that I've been working with Temple Bethel on.
And as we advance to the next slide, we're going to see Zack with a little more hair. He and I laughed when he sent this one to me. So Zack, what is it about your background that influenced you to become an artist?
Right. Well, yeah, this was a funny picture I love pulling up, that it clearly was always in my bones to become an artist as I look back here. And I said, the art stuck, the hair didn't. But I actually grew up with an architect father. My dad's Michael Oxman, and my mother is an artist herself, Lainey Oxman. Had a very unique upbringing as a child with their own entrepreneurship and artistic pursuits. And they raised me in Reston, Virginia, which in itself was an artistic expression of life. It was a new community, a new way of living that was developed in the 60s. So it really, I think, fostered these seeds of entrepreneurship and chasing dreams and artistry that as a child, never knowing any different, I think those were the seeds that really set me on this course. Should I continue, or you want questions in between? Or
No.
We're
going to advance to the next slide, and Rabbi Jessica is going to take over.
So what we've learned, that many of our artists have very high profile people that they have created commissions for and been asked to create commissions for, and there are several of your commissions here. Can you pick one and tell us a little bit of the story of one of these commissions?
Sure. Well, these are, this is, obviously fast forwarding quite a bit in my career to several works that started with a relationship in the Clinton administration, working with the White House. And then when the Obama administration came around and Hillary Clinton was made Secretary of State, that relationship with the White House really continued. So these show the initial projects working with the Clintons and having the opportunity to create a menorah for the White House back when I was 23 years old. And it was a really real milestone in my career and really set me off on this direction of the Judaic art. early on, and that continued on with almost a 20-year relationship that led ultimately to creating the sculpture that President Obama gave to the Pope when he visited. I think it was back in 2015. So it was, and in between all of those have been gifts to Shimon Peres or Benjamin Netanyahu or different individuals that whole side of this relationship of my art and through these administrations has really created some unbelievable and memorable moments and opportunities, and being able to just meet some really unique people.
That's fantastic. We're going to move on to the next slide. And then I'm going to have Susan talk about the story of how you came to the attention of the Art Task Force and Temple Bethel. So Susan, if we can move on to the next slide and talk about how Zack came to us.
So as I mentioned, Leslie introduced me to the idea of contacting Zack, and this was the piece that touched my soul. It's a piece that he designed in collaboration with Congregation Rodef Shalom in Arlington, Virginia. It was actually a piece that was a donor recognition piece. And if we could go to the next slide, which shows it up close and personal. It tells a story. Zack has definitely over the years increased his knowledge in Judaics. And I think Rabbi Jessica has an important question to ask you about this.
Yeah, so Zack, I'm a very literal, concrete person. And we can stay highlighted on Zack so you can see him and his reaction to seeing his work. I am literal and I am concrete. And one of the things I love about this piece is how literal it is. And when you were here at Temple Bethel meeting with the Art Task Force that Susan chairs, you talked a little bit about the concrete nature of the piece and the use of stones to convey donations and sizes. Can you talk a little bit about this piece and the nature of it?
Sure. Well, as you learned when I came down and spoke with you, the method that I really love working with synagogues to come up with ideas is really to come into it as this like open vessel for that I take everything in from the personality of the synagogue to which may include geography and location and things that they identify with, to the messaging that they're trying to convey. And it all goes into this vessel, and the ideas start percolating. And it almost, I think I described this before, that the idea takes shape before I really fully understand the meaning of it, because it's coming from an emotional spot. And that's what happened with this. Is I was feeling, it's a Temple Road of Shalom. It's a very natural setting. They're in the woods. They really identify with that. And so I started thinking of the palette as being these natural objects, and how can I identify donors through these natural objects. And it's almost like it starts presenting itself to me, stones, different shaped stones, and how they flow and how they move. And then it looks like a river. And then I start, it starts emerging, and I start thinking the River Jordan. And then I start looking at the different meanings of it. So it's almost simultaneously forming itself. And then the story comes here that almost, it puts it all together. And that's how I got to it. And then the different elements of it, those layers, start presenting themselves in the sense of this tactile nature. And one of their things was they wanted this to be identified with all generations, through children all the way up. So, I thought these stones are something that you could reach out and touch. Let it be something that could be experienced and touched. And so it's a fascinating, for me, I really enjoy the process, because I go into it, it reveals itself to me as much as I'm revealing it to you. It's this very open way of design development. And so it just starts making perfect sense as it starts taking shape. And so that's how I got to the stones.
Fantastic. Susan, you're going to talk us through some examples of Zack in the next couple of slides.
Would love to. So I want to show you a few examples of Zack's soaring work. The first one he created for the Bethesda Naval Hospital. And the second one, if we could advance to the next slide, That's a close-up of the Naval Hospital. And I want you to see this because you're going to hear from Zack what his vision is for Temple Bethel. And this gives you an idea of Zack's capability in 3D metal art. Let's see the next slide. Another example of Zack's work are laser cut stainless steel embellishments for the tower companies in Silver Springs, Maryland. If we go to the next slide, we can see close-ups of his work in this building. Advance, please. And lastly, everyone on this Lunch and Learn and everyone out there, you're going to get a sneak preview of Zack's vision for what he wants to do for us. So Zack, if you could take us through the next slides and briefly speak about the vision, the message, and the implementation, I think this entire group would be so grateful.
Of course. So again, having given you that sort of explanation on the Temple Road of Shalom piece and my workflow and the way I generate ideas, it was the exact same in this, flying down, meeting with the committee, really just listening, taking in the space. The imagery that came to me, and this was from feedback from all of those on the committee, was, if we advance the slide here, was to create an artwork that would lead people down through this corridor almost as if they were on a journey. And it starts with the display wall here with the donors, and all of these were criteria that were given, that how do we tie this together? How do we pull the person through and sort of celebrate each one of these as it moves through? So I thought that the sculpture could start almost emerging from this part of the journey, which is the donor recognition screens, and just pulling on different psalms or different phrases, but to start telling that story as the person's experiencing it. And so they see, this was an initial concept where I had it as birds. However, and through some of the feedback, this is a continuing evolving design, and these birds, they may actually be simplified even more so just into the pages of the books. But what it does is they fly through, releasing from the wall, like those pieces you saw, the suspended pieces, and will actually hang. So the artwork is actually lifting off the wall almost as it's carrying you through the corridor. And it dips down under the beams and then into the next main wall here that the sculpture sits. And this imagery I chose was these books, and some of the feedback and the rabbis was to create an area, potentially a library, where children or people could learn. And the whole concepts of books has such an iconic symbol in Judaism, and teaching and learning. So I thought that would be an interesting subject matter to celebrate, and that would be the one that creates the movement, and that would draw people in. So these pages that pull you in are almost like those coming into the books, which is giving, and then they yes. And some of those samples that Susan showed you is I work with these different materials to create the illusions of movements, like the water droplets that are cut. So these books will have a lot of dynamic action to them and movement to them. But the whole sculpture in this vignette will become, it's really an experiential environment, because you'll have books that can physically be read. So the story of the sculpture and this journey you're being taken on can actually be immersed into as you're sitting there, really a tactile example of its own meaning. And so having bookshelves here that could be curated and for children or adults sitting in this area. And then the journey continues as it carries you into the sanctuary, as the pages lift back off the books, and then they dip down in and fly. So the whole sculpture really does, it is designed to sort of physically and emotionally pull you on this journey through.
So we are so excited for the reopening of Temple Bethel, when we can start seeing you again and collaborating again. This amazing piece of art, by the way, is part of the learning living room. And so Zack picked up on the themes. It's going to be directly across the learning mosaic, which you saw last week. And as Zack told you, it will go from the digital recognition board that wall, sorry, that honors everyone that is given with their hands and heart and taken you right into our sanctuary. So now we're ready to talk about the sanctuary. Thank you, Zack.
You're welcome.
So let's go look at annoying wall that has bothered our clergy as they sit on the bema, our congregants as they sit in the sanctuary, because it's blank. It sits across the amazing 10 Commandments that were crafted by Rabbi Singer's nephew, Phil Rosenblum, at sitting in front of our bema, the gorgeous iconic ark that is part of the soul of Temple Bethel, and our menorah shofar behind it, also that was created by Phil Rosenblum, Rabbi Singer's nephew. And we go, this is emptiness. There's nothing spiritually uplifting about an empty wall. What can we do about it? So the art task force, after I brought this to their attention, said, find us some artists, we'll look at them. Next slide, please. So remember, it was always my responsibility to present a minimum of 4 artists and their works and their experience and their training. And everyone agreed with me that Bonnie Cohn was the artist that could create something very, very special for Temple Bethel. So for years, Bonnie has been working, and for months, we have had telephone conversations. My intuition was that Bonnie was our woman. And up until January, as luck would have it, Bonnie and her husband, Randy, came monthly to visit Bonnie's mom in West Palm. And during one of those visits in late December, Bonnie came to Temple Bethel, and she spent an entire day with her husband and me. We toured the Schaefer campus, we toured the Beck family campus, as I do with every artist. And I tried to translate what Temple Bethel's mission and vision is, so that she had a really good sense of who we were when she was going to present to the art task force. Unfortunately, we were never able to have that meeting, but I had already introduced her work and her soul to the members of the task force. So let's look a little bit at who Bonnie is and why the task force feels that Bonnie was the right person. And if we could advance to the next slide. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we have to look at Bonnie in her studio because the pandemic is preventing her from flying down. But we will get back to the task with Bonnie. So here's Bonnie. Art can tell a story. And Jessica, I know that you have an important question to ask of Bonnie.
Bonnie, welcome with us. Both you and Zack are the future, and between the soaring birds of Zack's and of the beautiful nature and colorful nature of your work, it gives us such hope in this unknown timeline we are in to think about the future of Temple Bethel, the Jewish world at large. I want to ask you the question, how does Judaism inspire your creations?
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this with the wonderful artists that you have commissioned work for the beautiful temple. I started out my Judaic career as a Hebrew school dropout. So, but USY gave me a whole new outlook on Judaic art, and actually I started learning along with my kids, helping my son with his learning to read Torah for his bar mitzvah, and worked my way up from being a Hebrew school dropout to helping be a gabbai in our congregation now. So it's been a lifelong Judaic learning experience.
And as we move on to the next slide, we're going to talk about that your works are not just in Jewish settings, but they are actually in the world at large. And if we can move to her piece that she did as an artist in residence for an organization that, oh, here's some other pieces of her work. So we're going to go to the slide that has your piece at a center that deals with aphasia. My friend's wife actually is dealing with aphasia. As we move to the next slide, you had an artist in residence experience.
I think it's not that one. It's
Yeah, that you had an artist in residence experience. If you can talk a little bit about your artist in residence experience, and when you work on projects that are for the world at large or deal with a specific issue like aphasia that you deal with as an artist in residence. We're going to advance to that next slide when we can. How does that inform what you do?
Well, that particular project and the projects that I've been working on actually for the last 4 years have not been focused on strictly Judaic art, but everything that I do is my thought process. This is the project. My creative process is all, I use the same kind of creative process for every project, and I really enjoy learning from my clients, and they're so varied. It just makes me feel like I have the most exciting and best job in the world. This particular piece for the Adler Aphasia Center, I worked with their art therapists, their physical therapists. If people don't know what aphasia is, it's an inability to speak. Most of the 80 residents that I worked with had strokes or some kind of neurological damage. And so they only had use of one hand. So I worked with their physical therapists, and we came up with a way. This is their donor wall, and I came up with a way for me to bring a project in for them to do individual pieces. And then I took them back to my studio where I was able to Skype with them and show them how their pieces were going to be integrated into the artwork. It was an extremely moving and emotional experience, very fulfilling. The people were so just so enthusiastic and really excited about it. And I really enjoyed. My mother suffers from aphasia, so I know how frustrating it can be, but the art really made a way for us to communicate with each other in a nonverbal way. And very fulfilling, wonderful project, and grateful that I was able to do it.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next slide, and I think Susan wants to talk to you about the learning that takes place in your projects.
Actually, Jason, if we could go back 3 slides, I want to show everyone before we get to the slide where I'm going to ask you a question. One more, Jason. One more, Beth. Perfect. This is the slide that made me call Bonnie. This is the ark that she designed for her own synagogue in Akron, Ohio. For me, it was such a spiritual awakening. And if you look at the right side, you can see that although her mosaic does not look like it has color, it has lots of color that shimmer as the light changes in that sanctuary. And I want you to think about this when Bonnie talks later about her vision for Temple Bethel. And if we could advance to the next slide, this was Bonnie's favorite because she's not only an artist, she's a teacher, and she's a grandma. And for all the grandmas out there, this is the kind of thing that Bonnie does with her grandchildren. And now, Jason, if you could please advance 2 slides. One more. Thank you. So this project sent chills up me, especially when you told me the backstory about syncopations. So that was a story where your art of collaboration soared. Tell us about the process by which you collaborated with Central State University and got to know the people that make up that university from a staff side and a student side.
Well, thank you so much for asking about this project, which is one of my favorite projects that I've ever worked on. I was chosen, it's the only historic Black university in Ohio, and I was chosen to work directly with the president of the university, and she had a vision. And my 15 years as a corporate design art director kind of gave me the skills that I use today to be able to listen to people, to be able to try to get into the heart and soul of an organization. And this woman was, this president of the university was so inspiring. She took me on a tour, and I mean, I kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. I was the whitest thing in the in the room, but she had this vision for this artwork in the main floor of the 3-story brand new student center. And she asked me, you know, to try to find her vision. I studied all that I could about African art. I approached it just like I do a Judaic project, where I used symbols that were meaningful, integrated patterns and colors from African traditions. And when the piece was done, there were 2 comments that were just really so universal in their meaning. The young man in the picture came up to me. This was right after it was installed. It took 3 days. Your picture of the trees in your chapel brought back memories of going up and down on the lift truck. But he came up to me and he said, he asked me if I was the artist, and he said to me, "I've never seen real art up close before." And at that moment, and I've been thinking about this a lot in the times that we're in, I just realized how much I took for granted. I went to art museums as a kid. I took my kids and my grandchildren to art museums. This young man had never been to an art museum, never seen art up close before. And one of the other comments was, when a young girl saw this, she said, "You know, this art makes me feel like this university cares about me." And to me, that's the most wonderful compliment for an artist, for anybody to receive a compliment. This makes me feel like you care about me. And so those are the kinds of feelings that I put into the arc wall at my synagogue, Bethel in Akron, and that I try to bring into every piece that I work on. It was very meaningful, and also because of the Ohio Arts Council bringing art into underserved communities, just a very meaningful project.
So Bonnie, I want to show your last piece. The piece, it's your largest piece. It's your largest installation. It took 18 months for you to create. It's all about connect. If we could see the next slide. So just like when you're looking through the glass doors of the Schaefer campus and you see our 3 tapestries, when you look through the doors of the entryway to this college, you are seeing Bonnie's design. And if we can advance to the next slide, you'll see close up and personal Bonnie's last work, installed right before
my last work.
last work installed, I didn't finish, right before the pandemic.
Okay.
Bonnie, how did this piece in particular affect your inner self and your very being? What are you left with as you pursue your career and your work with Temple Bethel before we get to that?
Okay, well, when we talked earlier in the week, it took 18 months to complete this, 80,000 pieces of glass. It's the word connect, 7 monumental letters. And a few weeks after it went up, the school closed. So there's no students and no professors and no one connecting with the artwork now. So it's been rough. It makes me really sad. But I'm hoping, just like you at your temple, and just like so many other organizations where your doors are closed and people can't come in contact with your beautiful artwork and sit in your sanctuary and enjoy your services, this kind of programming that you're doing is so wonderful and so important to be able to really connect. It's so nice to be able to personally connect with other artists, to connect with the rabbi and your congregation.
And to further connect with you, if we could have the next slide, Jason, as we further establish our connection with you, and you begin the design process for the sanctuary, I know it's going to constantly evolve, because today's world is not the same as when we first spoke in November, December. It's not going to be the same world in June. So just a very small sneak preview, because I know we're really early in the process. What are you thinking about for our sanctuary?
Well, thank you for asking. Just like Zachary was saying when he walked through the hallway to get a feel for the space, I was so grateful to be able to talk with you and be with you on that day and actually stand in the sanctuary, walk around the sanctuary that's been there for 40 years and is still a timeless, beautiful space. And so I sat in different seats, I stood, I walked around, I went to the bima, I went to the back and tried to get a feel, as the beginning of my creative process. And so I wrote down some thoughts, and that's about where I am right now. The piece, just thoughts about the feeling that this piece, I would want it to evoke, to be celestial and abstract, to be uplifting, to have many of the qualities that the art wall at my temple has, to be shimmering and radiant, to feel God's radiance spreading over everyone, but also to be thoughtful and calming. The art wall that I did in Akron, even 6 years later, there isn't a time that I'm there for services that someone doesn't come up to me and comment about it. So I want that calming, contemplative feeling to be present, to have direction to it, that it leads your eye to upwards and towards the arc. And the palette of mosaic is full of color, and it changes with the different hours of the day, different seasons, night and day. And 40 years ago, when your building was built, and beyond this moment in time, with God's help, I'll be able to create a beautiful mosaic for this. And I love mosaic art. And the thing that I love the most about it is it's a metaphor for life. You can have, a tiny little piece of ordinary tile. Maybe it's a little bit broken, maybe it's a little bit abnormal, maybe it's a little irregular, but that piece and how it relates to the pieces around it, it all comes together to form the picture. We're made stronger by the pieces around us. No single piece can stand alone. So I'm hoping that when we all get through this, and we will, that I'll be able to create that picture for you with everybody's pieces included.
So I really don't want to end this. I have totally enjoyed hearing from Claude and Zack and Bonnie. Claude, we're already enjoying the beautiful eternal light. Zack and Bonnie, we have so much to look forward to. And we can't wait to be able to do it. And now I turn it over to Rabbi Jessica.
Thank you so much. I can't thank enough Jason and Ross, who are producers behind the scenes, who are changing slides and playing videos and dealing with technical things. And I can't thank them enough. I can't thank Susan for being my partner in presenting this. I can't thank, like Susan said, Claude and Zack and Bonnie. And also, if you notice with each slide in all 3 weeks, all those who have made these made this art possible at the synagogue with their generous donations are featured, and can't thank everyone enough for this. On Saturday night, we aired a program, a synagogue making an hour-long variety show, for lack of a better word, about creativity during the time of COVID. And what we learned is that from the most famous creators in the world to the most people who never ventured into worlds of creativity before are thinking in ways, are pivoting and changing in ways we could never imagine. And it is only from this time that we had this idea of coming to all of these artists who had been part of our program to speak to us. We never in a million years otherwise would have been able to do something like this and bring you together. So I want to thank everyone who's watching for tuning in. It is a pleasure to spend this time with you. I want to thank our artists, and we can't wait to see what even this time of COVID will do to impact your work. And can't thank Susan enough for letting the art speak to us as much as the architecture. And so I want to wish everyone to stay safe and well. Thank you for joining us, Lunch and Learn. As you can see, next week in our third and final session of this 3-part series, we will look at the art of the Beck campus, and all those incredible artists who are part of that are listed there. So have a wonderful day, and I hope you continue to enjoy this series with us next week on Tuesday from 12 to 1, and thank you.